This video is meant to give you an idea of how to write a timed writing essay for the 2023 AP English Language Synthesis Vertical Farms prompt. So this will be a walkthrough through that prompt meant to help you have an easier time at writing really any synthesis essay, but obviously specifically to vertical farms since we'll be using that as our example. So this was the 2023 synthesis prompt, and since it's fairly short, I'll go ahead and read it. Vertical farms are indoor agricultural facilities in which plants are grown, often in a hydroponic, soilless environment on tall stacks of shelves. Plants are given water, nutrients, and light, mostly through automated processes. Advocates say that vertical farms are key to providing food for the future, yielding high-quality produce while making efficient use of land and water. Critics warn about the energy consumption associated with vertical farms, automated processes, as well as problems related to cost and nutritional value. Write an essay that synthesizes materials from at least 3 sources and develops your position on the value, if any, of vertical farms to the future of agriculture. So, unlike the rhetorical analysis prompt, where you actually have to read the prompt and most likely 4 out of 5 times you have to read the passage as well to get the point of the passage so that you can write your introduction. With a synthesis, everything you need for the introduction appears on the first page of the synthesis prompt. Everything you need to write the introduction appears in this prompt. So what they want you to do here is to develop your position on the value of vertical farms to the future of agriculture. It's not exactly asking you, do you agree or disagree with vertical farming? Vertical farming is almost a given here. It's going to happen according to this prompt. So then, if it happens, what is the position? What is your position on the value, if any, of vertical farming? That's a fundamentally different question than do you agree or disagree with vertical farming? And this is often the tack that a synthesis essay will take. It will not ask you to exactly agree or disagree. It'll throw some curveball in there. In this case, it's the value, if any, of vertical farms. So the synthesis prompt, like the argument quote, is going to be on a topic that you have probably never thought about before. We had windmills one year. We had, should we get rid of the penny one year? What are the roles of libraries moving on? What are the roles of the post office moving on? These are typical synthesis prompts. And have you heard of farming? Of course you have. Have you heard of the post office or the penny? Of course you have. But have you ever had a conversation with a friend of yours about whether or not you should get rid of the penny? I seriously doubt that. I mean, somebody in America has, right? But for the most part, they are choosing topics that, again, level the playing field. They want to choose a topic that most people have not thought about before and therefore don't have a preset opinion about. So I thought it would be a good idea to look at vertical farms and to see what they look like. This would not be an option, of course, on the AP exam. You wouldn't be able to look this up, but I thought that we could help ourselves and make things a little clearer in this essay if we had a picture of vertical farming. So you have to write an introduction for vertical farming for the timed writing. And again, everything I need comes from that first page. So I have 3 sentences that sort of define the issue. And then I come in with my thesis statement. Again, I use a subordinate conjunction. I think that's really important to use in the thesis statement. There are several subordinate conjunctions, but my 4 favorites are because, although, when, and if. I think that if you can master those 4 subordinate conjunctions, you'll be just fine on the AP exam. And then I choose my sources. I've already chosen them. C, D, and F. I contend that vertical farms have an increasing value to humankind. So you can see that I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with vertical farms. It's a given that I have to agree with them. They are going to happen. Now, do they have any value or not? And I'm contending that they do. How did I choose C, D, and F? This is the way I choose all of my sources. And I do suppose this takes something of a sophisticated writer, although I think that most students can do this. But C, D, and F are simply the shortest sources of the 6 that were given for this prompt. And I read the 3 shortest sources, and I use those, and I don't bother reading the rest of the sources. I think that you can pick up a lot of time if you can teach yourself to do this. If you don't need to read all 3 of the sources, then that's time you can spend writing instead of reading. So the 3 shortest sources in this case were C, D, and F, and that is the reason why I went with them. So source C was a table excerpted from an article in a magazine, and the table classified 4 different ways of farming using 7 different characteristics, and it gave a value to each of the 7 characteristics for each of the 4 types of farming. So, like, for example, the hydroponic soilless farming. Was it, how much yield does it have compared to other forms of farming? That was one of the characteristics. So all 7 characteristics and all 4 different ways of farming are rated in this table. So the 4 production systems are open fields, greenhouse, soil, greenhouse, hydroponics, and vertical farms. And then the characteristics deal with things like stability, controllability, and yield. So that was source C. Source F is a comparison of how much land we use today to feed the world and how much land it's projected we'll use in 2050 to feed the world. So right now, according to source F, we use enough land to equal the entire continent of South America to feed 6.8 billion people. If we increase by 2.7 billion people by 2050, it will be the entire continent of South America plus another Brazil. So you can see that Brazil makes up almost half of South America. So we are putting that much more land toward the use of feeding people. Again, that would be horizontal land for the most part. It would be open field cropping. Source D was not pictorial. It was not an infographic. So I did have something to read here, but it was the shortest of the readings. And this was excerpted from an article published online by an environmental scientist and sustainability expert. And source D actually goes against my thesis. It is not in favor of vertical farms, and I have a thesis that says it is in favor of vertical farms. So this is where it gets a little sophisticated. I have to be able to use a source that is counter to my idea in my essay. I think it's a lot easier to use sources that agree with you than it is to take a source that disagrees with you and poke holes in it. So my first body paragraph summary, again, here's that subordinate conjunction, although source D is dubious of vertical farms, sources C and F demonstrate the benefits of this new technology. So obviously I'm going to compare sources C and F. This is just the beginning of the introduction. So I have a topic sentence, again, using that subordinate conjunction. I mention all 3 sources, but I make it clear that I'm really going to be dealing with C and F. And then I have 3 sentences of summary. The 3 sentences of summary summarize basically what I told you already with source C and source F, just much more succinctly. Then I come in with the analysis for the first body paragraph. So you can see that I have much more analysis than I had summary of the textual evidence. I have 11 sentences of analysis, which is quite a bit, and I have only had 3 sentences of textual evidence. So you can read this paragraph, you can see the logic behind this paragraph. Hopefully the paragraph is persuasive. I'm not necessarily saying that it persuaded you, but just that you can notice and observe that it's a paragraph that is making an attempt to persuade you. Very important in the synthesis to get this analysis in here. The number one thing that will doom a synthesis timed writing is an over-reliance on the sources. So there's an exercise that I have my students do where I don't give them the sources, but I give them the prompt for the synthesis exam. And I make them write the synthesis essay without the sources, and then after they write it, they have to plug the sources in. And I do that because I want them to see that their thoughts and their ideas, just like in the argument essay, are more important here than the sources. The sources are just there to support your own opinion, your own view, your own position. Remember what the prompt said: develop your position. It didn't say develop the source's position. So an over-reliance on sources will probably not score. It will probably not get to the level of 4 where we need it to be to get college credit. So very important to inject yourself in here. I've got several first person plural pronouns. I use we quite a bit in this paragraph. I would have also been fine, but that ensures that you are present in the paragraph, that your opinion is taking precedence over the sources. That's very, very important. So how do I use a source that doesn't agree with me? Well, the best way, in my opinion, to use a source that doesn't agree with me is to either write a counter argument body paragraph or to write a counter argument into the conclusion. And writing a sophisticated counter argument can get you that sophistication point on the rubric, which is hard to get. Probably only about 2 in 10 students across the nation end up picking up that point. And I don't think it has to be as difficult to get that point as it might seem. I think that statistic of 2 out of 10 can really go up. And I think the most teachable way to get that sophistication point is to teach students to use a counter argument. So my topic sentence, I do not this time have a subordinate conjunction. I just have a coordinate conjunction. But source D brings up many legitimate criticisms of vertical farming, but it fails to take into account one very important possibility: people might starve without it. So I present somewhat of a summary of source D, or at least source D's thesis, right? That it brings up many legitimate criticisms of vertical farming. And then I think very powerfully I poke a hole in that by saying people might starve without it. So after that, I then have a counter to source D. It weaves between summary and analysis. It starts with the summary and then ends with the analysis. It's 10 sentences long, which is, quite a bit shorter than the previous paragraph, but this is probably more realistic for a high school student to be able to write a 10-sentence paragraph versus a 16-sentence paragraph. That's a little long, I suppose. But if you read through this, I think that I write a convincing argument for vertical farming against source D, and I address specific issues that source D brings up. For example, source D brings up the idea that food produced in vertical farming is more expensive. Well, I point out in my paragraph that it's more expensive now, but the more popular vertical farming becomes, the less expensive it will be, and therefore it will reach the masses eventually. Everything is very expensive when it first comes out. VCRs in the 1970s cost over $1,000, and today you can get, well, nobody would buy a VCR today, but toward the end of VCRs you could pick one up for $50, and they worked better than the ones in the 70s. So in the 70s, a VCR was technology that was really only hitting upper middle class and upper class homes. And by the end of the advent of the VCR, as we moved into DVD players and now streaming, everybody had a VCR, everybody had a DVD player. They were ubiquitous and they were affordable. And I argue in this paragraph that the same thing will be true of vertical farming. So final slide, another shot of vertical farming. The idea here is, my key ideas here are, the introduction can be written with just the first page. You don't need to read the sources to write the introduction to the synthesis essay. My second idea here is that if we are given 6 or 7 or 8 sources, and it's always 6 or 7 or 8, I've never seen more than 8 and I've never seen less than 6, then instead of reading all of those sources, I hone in on the 3 that are shortest, the 3 that are going to take me the least amount of time to read and analyze. And I use those sources in an attempt to pick up time to write. We want to transfer as much time away from reading as we can. We need to read. We need to spend plenty of time reading, but we want to spend, even though we need to spend plenty of time, we want to spend as little time as possible. And so that way we can transfer that time into writing. If you look at sources A, B, and E for this prompt, they are over a page long. I have probably saved myself 10 minutes of reading, and while that might not seem like much, in an exam that only gives you 135 minutes to write 3 timed writings and write them well, 10 minutes is a pretty significant amount of time. It's almost an 8% increase in the amount of time that you would have to write. So again, the other thing that's important about synthesis timed writing is that it is personal. You cannot just summarize the sources. You cannot lean too heavily on the sources. What you say, your opinion, is about the sources. You're talking about them, but you're not necessarily summarizing them. You summarize them for a sentence or 2, and then you get on with it, and you start giving your own ideas about these sources. That is key to scoring on the synthesis exam. So I hope this video will help you write a better synthesis essay than you could have before, and good luck on the 2024 AP English Language Synthesis exam. Synthesis prompt. We'll find out what weird topic they bring up next.